Hello, welcome. Thank you all very much for being here. It's really exciting to have you all. This is the first History Cafe back from summer break. And History Cafe Kubota Garden, including those of you on the live stream. I'd like to thank you again. I'm Sora. I work here at MOHAI in public programs, and really excited. So a few housekeeping notes before we begin. History Cafe as a series is presented in partnership with HistoryLink on the third Wednesday of every month. HistoryLink is a wonderful resource as the largest free online encyclopedia of Washington State history. I'd also like to thank Sophia and Christine at Kubota Garden for helping coordinate tonight's event. If you need a restroom, they're just beyond the deli case to the left and down the hall. Tonight's run of show will be a little different. I think a really nice opportunity for discussion. So the presentation is going to be divided into 5 chapters with opportunity for audience discussion and Q&A at the end of each, in which tonight's lovely presenters will prompt you about. There is a book by Kubota Garden available for purchase in the MOHAI Mercantile just through the open set of doors over there. And there are also some really lovely materials from Kubota Gardens in the back corner, which I'll tell you about at the end of the evening. Before we begin, it's important to acknowledge that here at MOHAI, we're on the historic and contemporary lands and waters of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and all Coast Salish people. Historically, Native communities were forcibly removed from this place with lasting impact on the land, water, and people. Therefore, it's important that we hold deep respect and gratitude for their unbroken stewardship of this place. We encourage you to visit the websites of local tribes and to visit their cultural institutions to learn more from the people. To introduce tonight's speakers, they're Ernie Dornfeld and Andrew Hem. Ernie Dornfeld is an active archivist and historian for the Kubota Garden Foundation. He has worked as an archivist and information system manager for King County and the City of Seattle and has volunteered for community nonprofit organizations. Andrew Hem, grandson of Tom and Amy Kubota, grew up immersed in the beauty and the spirit of Kubota Garden. From childhood days spent gardening with family to summers landscaping alongside his grandfather and uncles, the garden shaped his values. A lifelong Kubota Garden Foundation volunteer, he served on the annual meeting planning committee since 2020. Please give them both a warm welcome.
Thank you guys, and good evening to everybody. First, Ernie and I would like to make sure we take this opportunity to thank MOHAI for inviting us here and for allowing us to discuss one of our favorite topics. Like she had mentioned, I'm Andrew. I'm Fujitaro's great-grandson, Tom and Amy's grandson, and yes, a lifelong volunteer, though in my earlier years it was more voluntold than volunteer. I also just recently was honored to be elected to the board of the Kubota Garden Foundation. And then alongside me, Ernie has been for a long time, also a volunteer at the foundation, but he's really been the steward of our history and helping us understand and preserve the history of the Kubota Gardens. So I'm going to let Ernie kind of guide us through the history of the gardens, and then I'll inject with some fun family stories that I think are fun to share.
Good. We're going to do this talk in sort of 5 chapters, just to break it up and to encourage some discussion, questions. So we'll take a little pause at each of these, after each of these, and speak up. Tell us what you didn't understand, what you'd like to know more about, and so forth. Kubota Garden is a former nursery and demonstration garden in the Rainier Beach area of South Seattle. It was developed by Fujitaro Kubota as the centerpiece of his landscaping business and grew to 20 acres of developed garden and nursery areas. Starting in 1927, the Kubota family-owned landscaping business operated the garden until it was purchased by the city of Seattle in 1987. It's now part of the Seattle Park system. We're going to talk about the history of Kubota Garden. We also want to talk about the context in which Fujitaro Kubota and his family worked and lived. The garden and Kubota's landscape designs were built in a time of immigration restrictions, explicit racism, and exclusion from basic aspects of society such as property ownership. This story also shows how resilience and determination to overcome obstacles resulted in a garden that thousands of people enjoy today. Fujitaro moved to the U.S. in 1906 from Shikoku in southern Japan. He traveled first to Hawaii, then to the U.S. West Coast. He entered the U.S. just before the so-called Gentlemen's Agreements of 1907 to 1908 restricted immigration of working-class men from Japan. Oldest son of a rice farming family, he left behind a wife and daughter. He may have planned, like many, to work a while in the U.S., send money back, and return with some more money. Instead, he stayed, first working on a railroad and then in lumber mills in the Cascade foothills from 1907 to 1913. His wife, Kumai, joined him in the company town of Selleck, Washington in 1910. Their son, Takeshi Tak, was born in Selleck in 1912. Daughter May and son Tom were born in Seattle soon after. The Kubotas moved to Seattle in 1913 and went into business operating small hotels and apartment buildings. This was a common business among Japanese immigrants. Small businesses were an option for those, like Japanese, who were excluded from most trade unions, which excluded non-whites. Operating an apartment hotel also gave them a place to live. They lived in and operated several apartment buildings and finally had a building on Alder Street across that street from Harborview Hospital. In fact, this one, on the left-hand side of the picture, is something called the Taft Hotel. You can barely read the sign. This was on Washington Street, right sort of where Occidental Park is now, in the Pioneer Square neighborhood. This was the first of the number of buildings they offered. They didn't own the real estate, they leased it and operated a hotel or probably a long-stay hotel apartment building. They had 5 or 6 of those, I think.
You know, and Ernie, during this time, it wasn't just the adults that were doing the working. This is the time my grandpa would do a lot of selling newspapers, selling cushions at the Japanese theater. And all the money that he saved up from that actually was contributed to his dad when they bought the first 5 acres of gardens. So he got to help purchase the gardens.
Yeah.
A little louder, please. And
Oh, I'm sorry. What I was saying is my grandfather, and I apologize ahead of time. I have a really hard time calling my grandpa by his first name. So I'll probably say Grandpa Tom. So Grandpa Tom, when he was a child, he would earn money for the family by selling cushions at the Japanese theater or delivering newspapers, running odds and ends for guests in the hotel. And all the money that he did earn, I'm told, was given to the family so they can use that money towards the purchase of the first 5 acres of the gardens.
Fujitaro Kubota had friends who did landscaping work, started working with them, and started his own business in 1923. He did maintenance work like lawns, but soon was designing landscapes for new construction. He had learned some basics about growing things from his training in agricultural courses at school in Japan, but also tried to learn about landscaping in the new conditions of the Northwest. Seattle was growing at the time, and there was lots of work. The Kubota gardening business advertised and documented projects for marketing purposes. Consequently, we have a number of photographs that were done in the 1920s of their landscape projects, some of which we don't know where they were. So if you recognize the house, let us know. The business grew, but the only nursery area he had first was a portion of a lot next to their apartment building where they could store nursery stock. Tom Kubota recalled how the family drove around on Sundays looking for a piece of land for a nursery and for a place where Fujitaro could show how he could design a place with water and a hillside.
And at the end of this section, one story that I always loved hearing about as a child was how they found the gardens. And the way it was told to me was on a Sunday drive. Grandpa Tom and his dad were driving down a dirt road. I now know that road to be Renton Avenue. And they were driving to a specific lot that was available that they decided to walk. And as they were walking the property, my grandfather would say the air was still and you couldn't hear a thing except for the sound of water running. And in that moment is when my grandfather looked at his dad, and great-grandpa Fujitaro looked at him and said, "This is it. We found it." So running water, that's how they found the gardens.
In 1927, Kubota found a swampy 5-acre property on Renton Avenue in the Rainier Beach neighborhood. And this is it. From around that time, maybe a little later, Renton Avenue was likely one route for the indigenous trail connecting what's now central Seattle with the Black River settlements in the Renton area. King County developed the road in the 1870s. The area that's now the garden was likely logged in the 1890s and was subdivided into 5-acre lots in 1899. By 1920, each lot had a dwelling on it. Like elsewhere in Rainier Beach and Rainier Valley, many had orchards and gardens. Fujitaro could not legally buy land. The Washington state alien land laws, specifically aimed at Japanese, forbid purchase or even leasing of land by Asians. However, a US-born friend, Sakai Arai, bought the land in his name and leased it to Kubota. Kubota and his crew went to work building a drainage system, roads, and a rockery around Renton Avenue. This would serve as a nursery and as a place to showcase his work. This was the first piece of land for the garden, which would eventually total 20 acres. Thanks. The demonstration garden built on this site came to include a creek with several ponds, created with low dams, and a so-called Japanese garden around a spring-fed pond. Roads provided access to the developed areas. The roads in a parking area were not something you'd likely see in a traditional Japanese garden. This photo is a picture of the family and their landscaping crews on what's now called the Hart Bridge, which you could drive across, and it's still there, been reconstructed 2 or 3 times since. And probably from around 1930 or a little after. So the roads were not traditional. In fact, the idea of the garden was not to be a traditional garden, but to adapt elements of Japanese gardens to conditions in the northwestern U.S. Like Kubota's larger landscaping projects, Kubota Garden made a lot of use of water and stone. He used native and non-native plants alike, experimented a lot to see what would work. He learned to work with Japanese pines, and those became a specialty of his work. Mm-hmm. There he is in a pine. Landscaping clients included the Rainier Club and a number of wealthy Seattle area families, but Kubota also did work on a more modest scale for people who couldn't afford a large, expensive project. With the development of the demonstration garden, Kubota could invite potential clients to see what he could do. He may not have felt secure in his English language skills, but the work could do the talking. At the time, the garden was also a nursery, and plants in the developed garden were often sold and replanted on a project. As the Depression of the 1930s went on, there were fewer paying projects. Kubota filled the time by working on the garden and having his crews work on the garden, so he didn't have to lay people off. It is thought that the late 1930s saw the garden as good as it would ever get. Kubota added property to the garden as he could afford it, or in some cases not afford it, according to the family members. The family devoted all their resources to building the garden and the business. Tom Kubota recalled how the money he earned on his paper route went to expanding the garden. The Kubota family moved to the garden in 1940 after buying an adjoining piece of land and remodeling a house that stood on it. Now they were able, for the first time, to live where they worked and didn't have to commute from the apartment on First Hill.
Yeah. And could afford it or couldn't afford it. I think it was more oftentimes the latter. And great-grandpa would say when a piece of land came available that he wanted but couldn't quite afford, when he would still buy it anyways, he would say, Cammie would take care of it. Cammie being spirit. And so that always seemed to work out, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah. Or three. So yeah, now that we've reached the first part of, or the first break, we'd like to invite anybody who does have a question to feel free to raise their hand, and we have a microphone that can come out to you.
Hi. Great information so far. Thank you. I'm wondering, at first you said he leased the land, but then he started purchasing pieces as he could not afford them. What was that transition to, like historically or politically, to where he could purchase land?
I think the first case, his son Takeshi became 21 in 1933. And then, since he was U.S. born, he could hold the title of the land in his name. They also transferred the title in the apartment building, which I think they probably had bought on contract or something from the original owner, to his name. And then at that time they started buying other, and they would just be all in the names of the kids. So the alien land law was especially nasty in that it was selectively enforced. And there are stories of, in the White River Valley, probably southern Kent, there were co-ops of Japanese farmers who bought land and had a white person or a native-born person hold title to it, and then they would lease it. And they had big sort of collective farming operations. This got under the skin of some of the politicians and local white farmers, presumably, although I don't know if there were really any complaints, but they seized the land, basically. They seized the land from whoever had leased it to them, and they were left without anything. And it was, in other cases, the law was, probably ignored. But it meant people probably had to keep their head down, or enforcement could happen. So it was and it wasn't repealed until 1966. After it had been on the state ballot twice in the 1960s to repeal the alien land law. So, it was pretty durable piece of legislation.
Nope, I think that's it. I'm going to go to the next section.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, on the picture with the family, can you say who the people are? I think it was that one, yeah.
Yep,
Thank you.
there we go. On the left is...
Grandpa's on the left. That's Grandpa on the left.
Yeah, Tom on the left, Takeshi, May, Mrs. Kubota, and Fujitaro on the right. And Fujitaro looks a lot taller than any of them. I don't know if he had platform boots on or something,
like 4 foot,
but he was pretty short, so
4 foot 10,
it
4
may
foot
be
11.
a camera trick. I don't know. But it's, and I think it was around 1940. We don't have exact dates for some of the photos, although all these photographs are available through the Densho project, densho.org, and about 3,500 of them anyway. So there's a lot. A lot of them are modern, but a lot are quite old. And so
Yeah, you might even see some of me in there as a kid.
that's right, for sure.
Sorry. I was just remarking to Ernie, you probably will see pictures of me as a kid in there too.
Other questions? Yes.
The house in that slide,
Yep.
is that still standing on Renton Avenue?
It isn't. It
Okay.
was actually, this house wasn't on Renton Avenue. This was a piece of property they bought in 1940 and remodeled the house. This is after they remodeled it, and it was on back a little bit from the street on 55th Avenue. That house was there when the city bought the property, and it was demolished. It had kind of deteriorated, and it was demolished in the 90s, I think. But that had been one. There was more than one house on the property. There were like there were three at one time. So it's because there were various lots. Each lot came with a house, basically. Since then they didn't like where it was, so they'd move it. So down the hill, up the hill.
That house is located where the current entrance to the house, to the garden.
Right to the right of where the gate is. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, when I was young, it was used as like an office for the landscaping
right.
company. Sorry. It's my very first time being a speaker anywhere, so I'm learning as I go. Thank you. The house at the top of the hill, when I was young, we would go to the gardens with my dad as they would go to landscape. My dad and my uncle and Grandpa Tom would meet at the gardens before they went to go do their jobs. And that's what I remember them going into to change into their landscaping clothes. It was right across from the barn that they used to have all the tractors in. Yeah. But it was pretty run down back then too.
So they use it as their office as well then?
Just as it almost seemed. No, I was 5 at the time, but yeah, that's just. I remember my dad going in there to change. He went in with dirty clothes. He came out with clean clothes, and then we went out to dinner. It was great. Yeah.
More questions? Comments? Okay, we'll continue. Living in the garden didn't last long, however. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. went to war with Japan in 1941, and in 1942, Executive Order 9066 resulted in the Kubota's incarceration in the Minidoka War Relocation Authority camp in Idaho. Tom Kubota was drafted into the Army, and Tak became a civilian Army employee teaching the Japanese language. Both worked in the military intelligence service. The house was rented out to a tenant, but the garden was abandoned for the rest of World War II. Tak home on furlough. Tom on the job. In Minidoka, Fujitaro became camp gardener. He designed and built a garden at the camp entrance right behind the honor roll display listing family members serving in the military. You can't see it, but it's back there. We don't have any photos of it, although I think the National Park Service does have some. That's now a National Park Service site.
And am I correct in I thought I learned that the rock garden that was landscaped at the Minidoka is still there.
There's still some remnants of it.
Yeah.
Some of the stone is there, yeah.
Interesting.
And there's a plan, I think there's a plan now by the Park Service to partially reconstruct it with materials that would have been used at the time. And they've been doing research on that. There've actually been excavations, and they figured out what a lot of the stuff was. So, but you can't see much there. It is behind that. And part of the reason we don't have photographs is that people who were incarcerated weren't supposed to have cameras. So the only photographs you really see that were done by the residents of the camp were family photos up close, like the ones we've seen. And they were being watched from guard towers. And I'm not sure how well it was really enforced as the war went on, but there are really no architectural photographs, so to speak, of the camp that we have that tell us something about the Kubotas, unfortunately. There were official government photographers that did shoot photos there, including some pretty famous photographers, but a lot of those were propaganda photos. So.
And as I was going through my mind on what stories I could share about our family during these times. There was not a lot that I had to grasp onto, but there was a couple stories that always stood out that kind of fit in that time period. The first is actually how my grandma and my grandpa met. I always thought that was a cool story. So before the war, my grandfather liked to play basketball and coach basketball. He coached a women's team in a Japanese league, recreational league. And he was competing against a team from Bellevue with his team, which was all athletes from Rainier Beach. And that's where he saw my grandmother for the very first time, playing for the team that was beating him. And I bring that up now in the context of the Minidoka only because, from my understanding from my family, he didn't really get a chance to date or see her because of the war. But when he went on leave to visit the family at the Minidoka, that's where he ran into her again. And that's where they kind of re-met and rekindled that relationship. And the reason why that pops in my head so far, actually just learned this the other day, and I think it's so awesome. Just kind of chance meetings. I learned from my father that when he was in his 20s, he used to work for banks doing yard cleanup in bank-owned properties. And he told me there was a day where he was in South Seattle and he was mowing a lawn, but his blade on his mower was really dull. So he tried quickly to find a place where he could sharpen it and thought that he had found a landscaping supply company. So he went there and drove onto the property and ran into a nice man who explained to him, this isn't a landscape supply company, but let's see if we can sharpen that blade for you. And did what he could to help him sharpen the blade so he can go back. Now, it was years later that my dad went back to that property. And it was when he was going to meet his future family for the first time. And it was my grandfather that he had run into. What a crazy world, right? I found that so fascinating. My dad told me that like maybe a week ago. And that was the coolest thing ever. The other great story that I have from my grandpa, Grandpa Tom, from that era is a story that I heard actually at his memorial, which is so sad that you hear such great stories for people at their memorials. But a person who served with him went and gave us a little speech, and it went a little something like, at the end of the war, one of the things that he was tasked to do was to get in a boat off the coast of Japan and go along the coast and tell everybody, hey, guess what? The war is over and you've surrendered. Please come out and we'll take you where you need to go. And I don't think that message was received with full belief because he says he got shot at a lot during that process. But I thought, well, what a weird thing to have to do in war, right?
Questions, comments, yeah?
So this is a really special sign and location at Minidoka. The sign was painted by two Issei artists from Seattle, Kamikichi Tokita and Kenjiro Nomura. They were both sign painters. That was their job at Minidoka. And the woman pictured is the daughter, Masako, of a third artist who was very well known among Issei artists in the 30s. All three of them were very, very prominent in Seattle, Northwest, the West Coast, and occasionally they showed their work elsewhere. And she was originally at Minidoka, left when the War Relocation Authority was urging people to get out. That's another story, but and she went to school in Minneapolis and eventually joined the Women's Army Corps, it was called. So I think this picture is a really powerful one, or the garden and the sign by itself. And the sign has been recreated. They continue to add names as they learn of more names. But, you know, we have the American eagle over people taken out of incarceration, serving by volunteering or being drafted out of the camps. The classic image of United States power. And behind it is the Japanese garden. And it, to me, is one of the greatest bicultural immigrant stories of how that works together. So thank you for this photo.
Thank you for the story, actually. That's amazing.
Yes.
You say you have several of your family members were drafted into the military. Do you have any notes on how they were feeling about watching their families being forcibly deported to internment camps while being drafted into the military?
I would say I don't really. It's not something that was discussed a lot. And probably the reason why I didn't have as many stories to share during this time period is just simply because of that fact. We didn't really talk about it a lot. My grandpa Tom was the kind of guy that he only wanted to spend his emotions and his energy on his emotions for things that he could control, and things that he couldn't control, he just resigned to not be in control of them and to not let them negatively affect his life or his mindset, I guess.
Other comments? When the Kubotas returned to the garden after their release in 1945, they found that it was a wreck. High grass grew everywhere, and it was completely overgrown. An acquaintance had paid the property taxes during the war, so they still had the land and the debt. They just had to bring the garden back to where it was. The whole family worked in the business as it started to prosper again in the 1950s.
The landscaping truck.
Right?
Do you recognize your seat, Auntie? Auntie Linda would tell me that in between the front driver's seat and passenger seat of that truck was a piece of plywood just big enough for her to have a seat. I thought that was hilarious. No seatbelt.
We have hardly any photographs of this period, so between 1945 and 1950, I think they were busy and not doing marketing so much.
Yeah.
They did get business. I mean, they got business, and people were asking them, when are you going back to doing landscape designs and things? So.
Well, I think another thing too to remember is that the end of the internment, as the family was getting ready to leave the Minidoka, there were a lot of stories and rumors about how it wasn't safe for Japanese people to come back to the city of Seattle. So the family actually decided to send Grandpa Tom ahead to kind of scope it out. And when he came back and talked to some of their former clients and they assured him that it was safe, that's when they sent for the family. But when Fujitaro came back from the Minidoka and found the garden overgrown, in some places waist high for him, again, very short man, and then had to realize that they had to tame it all back down, Grandpa said it was the only time he's ever seen Fujitaro cry. So I know it's a very hard, plus a big garden to get back into shape before you go fix other people's yards.
Kubota's business resumed getting large jobs, such as landscape work at Seattle University, the Blodell Estate on Bainbridge Island, and many others. The garden was once again a gathering place for people in the community as well. That's a Blodell, it's actually from a magazine, a photograph of the Blodell project that Fujitaro, among a number of other landscape designers, worked on.
And who is that in front?
That is Fujitaro Kubota, yeah. I think it was in the rain, too. I think the umbrella wasn't for the sun. I think it was raining. I think in the original photograph you can see the raindrops on the water. But Mr. Kubota built one more large feature in the garden. At the time of the Century 21 World's Fair, he wanted to develop the steep hillside to the west of the creek. He brought in hundreds of tons of stone, built the plumbing and the pump system for a creek and waterfall, and created the mountainside. Here he's walking down from the top of the hill to the west of Mapes Creek, which goes to the property. Winding paths across the new creek led to views of Lake Washington from the top. A sheltered lookout provided a place to rest and enjoy the view, and a At a turnaround in the road at the top, a memorial stone with a carved inscription tells the story of the garden.
Yeah.
That's still there.
That's still there.
Hard to read, but it's there. And this is the lookout shelter.
You know, Grandpa Tom often used the mountainside as a metaphor for life. He would talk about as you ascend the mountainside, the path gets harder, such as it does in life. And as you near the summit, it begins to narrow. But once you reach the summit, it opens up again in all of the nature and beauty and the beautiful views. And it was a very special place to him. It's where he would go to relax, reflect, and meditate. And it's always been a special place for us kids as well. It was the place that we always raced to see who can get there first. I don't know if you've been up the mountainside, but there are many different paths to take and many different paths to choose. We all thought we had the best one, and we would try to prove it to each other every day.
Fujitaro was 82 years old when the mountainside was completed, and he continued to design and manage large projects in the years after. This is a project in the Madison Park neighborhood. From one viewpoint, looking down a hill at a pond and a bridge. At work at Seattle University, placing some stone. And this is a big project, hillside project on Mercer Island. The Kubota Garden business was originally taken over by sons Tom and Tack, but the elder Kubota stayed active in the garden. He received wide recognition for his work, including receiving the 5th Order of the Sacred Treasure Award from the government of Japan in recognition of his work to gain respect for Japanese-style gardening. Fujitaro died in 1973, but the business stayed active. The expense of maintaining the garden became a struggle for the family business to support. At the same time, Fujitaro and the Kubota family had welcomed neighbors to enjoy the garden and wanted to provide something the public could continue to enjoy.
And then before we go to the next section and open it up for questions and comments, just some fun stories that popped in my mind while we were kind of going through this section. The Sunday drives. The Sunday drives were big in the family. They often went on Sunday drives, usually on Sundays, because they worked 5-6 days a week. And oftentimes those drives would end up at a field with a big rock or a bunch of rocks. And Grandpa would joke to my aunties and uncles and mom that they needed to get out, and so he can go and put the rock in and take it back to the garden. And he might come back for them. Another fun place that they would go on their Sunday drives, or sometimes they would do day trips, was they went on a day trip up to Deception Pass. Deception Falls up at, what is that? Stevens Pass? Stevens Pass. And back then you could still pull right up to the base of the falls. And what they remember and what they told me was that he was so excited. Now, granted, he was in his 80s at this time, Fujitaro. He was so excited to get there and to see the falls that as soon as they parked, he would jump out and scurry up the slippery, wet rocks on the side of the falls just so he can make it to the top, only to lean over so far that Grandpa would have to grab him by the belt to keep him from falling over because he really wanted to see the origin of that waterfall. I thought that was hilarious. And then the shelter. They weren't overly wealthy, and so when things needed to be built around the gardens, they really relied on what they can find and also on who had the skills to do it. I want to make sure I get his last name right. Billy Souter was a very important person to my grandfather. He's someone that was like family to him and someone who worked with him. And he was kind of the go-to builder at the time. So the shelter at the top of the mountainside is actually built by Billy Souter and using only the materials that they could have, finding around the garden, scrap materials that they found around the garden, which is what gives it that natural look, something that Don did such a great job carrying forward. Don Brooks, who took over as the head gardener when the foundation was formed. And then just one thing that I wanted to speak to, Fujitaro had this vision of the gardens and what he wanted it to be. And my grandfather he had that same vision and he carried it forward. But what I think is less known, and I know this from working for the company, my Uncle Alan, he has that same gift. And it's really impressive to watch. You don't understand it at the time. At the time, you're 15 years old and you think he's just holding a cup of coffee and staring into nowhere. But now that I think about it as an adult and I understand how these things work a little bit better, I realized we didn't have a single blueprint. We had no schematic. We had no map. We landscaped huge yards that took weeks or months that were very intricate. And it was all in his head. That vision that Fujitaro had when he pictured the garden and what it could be is a gift that he passed on to Tom. Why is that his name? And my Uncle Alan. Maybe not so much to me, but it's just something that's so impressive. I can't build a thought without a map. So to have them be able to build and see the finished product and have it be so extravagant and beautiful is just something amazing.
Questions, comments? Yes?
I've been to Bodell, and I know there are rooms. I don't think I need it, but okay. So I'm wondering, do you know which rooms he worked at in the Bodell Gardens?
I don't exactly, but someone in the room does. There are a couple of people in this room that know way more than I do about the garden and his work, so maybe they'll speak up, I don't know.
The section that they built is called the Japanese Garden. It's just that one section, none of the other sections. And the building that was at the back of the garden, that was built, I think that was designed by Paul Kirk, a well-known architect around here. And on the back side of that, there was a swimming pool that was eventually filled in and gravelled up. And behind that is a really big stone with a Tanyosho pine, one of the key, that's actually the logo of the Kubota Garden Foundation. And that huge stone there was placed by the Kubotas. And in talks, the docents talk about how that stone was so carefully placed. And Tom told me they basically just backed up and dumped it out of the truck. And that's how it landed. Perfect way to design.
Sounds about right. See, they needed a crane, Don. Yeah, but they didn't have a crane yet.
No, they didn't have a big enough crane.
Yeah. Do you remember when Grandpa bought his first crane?
No.
Yeah. He was so excited he drove Linda down to Tacoma and pointed it out on the freeway. That's the one I got. Look, you see it? That's how cute.
Other comments, questions?
I have a question. Is there a list somewhere of the gardens that he designed in the area that are publicly available to visit, whether that requires a fee or not? Or other maybe residential ones that might be on garden tours, for example?
I'm not sure about residential gardens. I know that there are some in the Rainier Beach area that have been on garden tours. He worked on the artist Paul Horiuchi lived in Rainier Beach neighborhood, and Fujitaro and he were friends, and Fujitaro would go to his house and they'd work together on the garden apparently. And that garden has been on garden tours in that area. The public gardens really are the Blodell project, and lots of sites at Seattle University. There was work done at the Seattle Times building, but I think that's all gone pretty much. There is a park across from the former site of the Seattle Times. I can't remember the name of the park, but it's right near the Mirabella retirement community. But I don't think much of the original landscaping is left. It's pretty much been wiped out. There was a big development there, and it's kind of gone. Others, there are some, front yards of people.
I just wanted to say something really quick too. First, I'm looking at the back of the head of Don Brooks. Don, it's really good to see the back of your head, but I can't wait to see your face. This is Stephanie talking to you from the back of the room. But what about Dunn Garden? Wasn't there some work at Dunn?
There is an area at Dunn Garden, but that's in private ownership, and I'm not sure it's regularly open to the public. It may be in a tour, but we do have some documentation on that and some contemporary photos, but there are probably others that we don't know about. We do have a project to document these things, and we've talked to a lot of private citizens whose houses have projects designed by Fujitaro and by Tom Kubota, and so we pursue these leads as they come up. And if anybody here has a Kubota garden that we don't know about, we really like to hear about it. And we try to get contemporary photos of when the garden was built. And we have a lot of those, and then and current ones as well. Sometimes somebody puts something up for sale, and there are a lot of photos on Zillow too, so we can harvest those. But it's a little tricky, and we know that there were many more than we're aware of. Particularly in the Magnolia neighborhood, we haven't documented any of those. There are quite a number in Laurelhurst, and some of those we know where they are. But we do. In many cases we do, but we don't publish it. The people who give us our information wouldn't probably like it. But I was wondering if they were actually known. Yeah, they are known. Yeah, some of them are known. I mean, I don't know what percentage we know. It probably is no more than 10 or 15% of the projects. Some of the bigger ones maybe. Are there more comments, questions? How are we doing? We're doing good. Okay. This is just a gathering in the garden. This is probably the late 1940s. It looks like it might be a community group of some sort. That's Mrs. Kubota on the left with a dark sweater on. And we don't know who the other people are. In some cases we do have names. The Kubotas had tried to encourage they wanted to offer a place. This is something we'll get back to soon, but people felt the Japanese community had no place where people could gather for maybe not so much festivals, but picnics and community gatherings. And so they would encourage people to come and use the garden by prior arrangement, I think, usually. And so people would go there for picnics and prefectural associations of people from a certain area of Japan would meet there and have an event. And then garden clubs would come visit too, a lot, of course. So there was really a desire on the part of the family always to open the garden to the public, not as a regular park like it is today, but to be welcoming to people who wanted to visit and get the tour. So. This is in the grounds of the garden. This is in the area that's now the mountainside. There was a lawn. It was planted in lawn at this time, and this is at the top. In the background, you can sort of see a road. There's a turnaround down there and a parking area. So I think that's where this is. It's looking down. So now we come closer to the present. 50 years ago, neighbors in the Rainier Beach community, I'm going to preface this by one thing. The gardening business really, as it developed and after Fujitaro's death, really couldn't support the kind of real estate that the garden took up. They used it as a nursery, and probably 3/4 of the land was planted in nursery stocks, so trees, some of which are still there. Mm-hmm. Lots of them are still there. Lots of shrubs and trees. They would buy things small or start them from seed and then grow them up and use them when they were mature and put them on jobs. And this gave them a lot of stuff to use, but the business wasn't absorbing those things as fast as it had, I think. And there were increased costs for taxes and putting in a sewer system, all kinds of assessments. And they really couldn't support the garden. It was difficult for the family to support the garden and maintain it, which was a major thing to do with family labor, right? So in 1975, the neighbors of the garden, and so they let it be known that they would sell, they would like to, they were interested in somebody buying the garden property. In 1975, the neighbors in the Rainier Beach community tried to convince the city of Seattle to buy the garden. They were doing this as a project to commemorate the U.S. bicentennial. At the time of the bicentennial, in neighborhoods in Seattle were encouraged to come up with a project, and whether it was a big flag or building a park or something. And this was theirs. The city said, that's nice, and didn't do anything. In 1980, the city was declared a city landmark, and soon afterward, a scheme arose that would protect a designated core area while potentially opening the rest to other development. And you can see that in this picture. This is actually a developer's plan. There was an attempt to put a lot of apartments on it, and the area in the middle, sort of a up and down thing that goes off to the right, that's sort of stippled, that was what they call the core area of the garden that was declared a landmark. Or the whole garden was declared a landmark, but that was the area where controls were agreed upon by the owners of the Kubotas at the time and the city. The city and the family negotiated controls on the core area, which meant that would be legally more or less untouchable. But basically, what this amounted to, the proposal amounted to a multifamily development with hundreds of units for the rest of the property. I think there's a big building to the north there, and the rest of it's clusters of condo units. The single-family zoning of the site stood in the way of this, and it gave people in the neighborhood some leverage to oppose the project. The proposed development was revised a couple more times before the necessary zoning change was finally defeated by the city council in 1986. Another proposal for city purchase of the property was advanced around the same time, led by city council member Jeanette Williams. In 1987, Kubota Garden was purchased as part of the city's park system. Fujitaro had often invited people to use the garden. People in the family wanted to share the garden with the public. They sold the property to the city for a lot less money than the property would have yielded if developed. Now that Kubota Garden was city property, what was to become of it? Advocates for garden preservation became active in a city advisory committee. The committee urged the Parks Department to maintain the character of the garden as an American-Japanese garden. That's hyphenated. This meant no playfields, limited picnic facilities, and no competing uses. Some of the same people formed the Kubota Garden Foundation in 1988 to advocate for the garden, to raise funds for the projects and planning, and to sponsor programs. The city's Parks Department has supported the integrity of the garden since then by purchasing open space land surrounding the garden, especially in the watershed of Mapes Creek, which runs through the garden. And I'm not sure the total acreage of the surrounding land, but it's a lot. It's probably 20 acres plus. There's sort of a buffer between that and power lines and other neighbors. The Kubota's vision for the garden has been passed down through the family. Similarly, the landscape design approach of Fujitaro Kubota was passed down by example through his son Tom and grandson Alan. Those who worked with him learned by his example. This tradition has continued through to the present, with Tom Kubota and Alan Kubota working closely with city gardener Don Brooks, who led the city's Parks Department work at the garden for many years. Here they're planting a pine, I think, at the first foundation annual meeting, or shortly thereafter. Today, city gardeners maintain the garden with some help from foundation volunteers. The foundation works to ensure that the garden is preserved in the spirit of Fujitaro Kubota.
And then I was going to share just a couple more stories if I can, if you'll allow me. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, Ernie, about the family maintaining the gardens. And yeah, that's what my childhood was. And it sounds great when people find out that I'm related to the family. They say, oh, well, that must have been such a wonderful place to grow up. And they're right. It really was. But we did work hard. But what made it great was we were all there together every time, every day. So like I said earlier, Dad and Grandpa and Uncle Alan would go on their landscaping jobs. And me and all of my cousins and my aunties and my grandma would walk into the lower garden and we'd start our work, picking weeds, deadheading rhododendrons, and just maintaining the garden together, always together. And I remember if we did a good job, by the time lunchtime came around and we had gotten our work done, we got to go play tag. Or I think my cousin Justin taught me how to cast a fishing pole in one of the ponds. Yes, we got in trouble for it. But that's what childhood was like for us in the Kubota family, for me and all of my cousins. And I cannot imagine a better way to spend your childhood, literally surrounded by your family, going out to dinner and celebrating together all of the time. It was a wonderful way to grow up. And with that, I would share with you one last story. This is about the greatest pieces of advice that my grandfather ever gave to me. And I remember that it was when I was working for Uncle Alan in the landscaping company, and we were getting ready to leave the ranch, is what we called, where we all met in the morning. Usually, I got to sit in a dump truck with my cousin and my dad, always in the middle because I was the smallest, and we would go straight to the job site. But today, for some reason, I got to go with my grandpa, and we went to a nursery. And I remember when we were at the nursery just being marveled by the fact that everybody there just loved him. Like he was just the best thing that happened to their day. And I remember as we were driving away from the nursery, I commented on it. And Grandpa said to me, it was two pieces of advice that he gave me. He said to me, if you want to be happy in life, you prioritize your family. But if you want your life to be full and happy, then you should be treating everybody you meet as if they're already a member of your family. And I live my life by that. I think that's great advice. And then, of course, the second piece of advice that he gave me, which is also equally as important, he said, never get stuck behind a Metro bus. Heed his words. It's sage advice.
Questions, comments? Additions? Okay, I'm going to wind up by talking about how we know this stuff. This is the plea for people sharing what they know, sort of thing. I'd like to talk about the sources for this history. Almost all of what is known about the history of Kubota Garden is from the oral tradition or from photographs. Family members have shared their memories of the garden and the landscaping business. Former employees of the Kubota business have shared photographs and their experiences on the job. Fans of the garden and clients of the Kubota landscaping business have generously shared their memories and photographs.
That's how we know.
The garden, yeah. The garden will celebrate its 100th anniversary in 2027. One of the ways we'd like to celebrate is to gather stories from the community about how Kubota Garden has affected them. If you have memories or stories to share, please get in touch. Thanks.
Okay. With that.
Last words,
Anybody got some last words?
questions?
I have some last words if nobody has questions. Yeah.
Andy, did your great-grandfather have training in like gardening, or was this just a vision that was a passion?
From my understanding, no. He was not formally trained in landscaping, both Japanese and Northwest.
I just, I just want to say we've been going to Kubota Gardens once or twice every year for a few decades, and I'm so impressed that the Friends Group keeps improving the gardens, but keeping the spirit alive. I don't know of another park in this whole Northwest that does both of those things.
Yeah.
So good work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, then I have a few parting thoughts as we get ready to go. Thank you very much, Andrew and Ernie. This was a really wonderful
Thank you for
presentation.
having us. It was a pleasure.
And thank you again very much to the Kubota Garden Foundation. I wanted to shout out their materials that they have in the back. A flyer with information about the free Kubota Garden documentary, Fujitaro Kubota and his garden, a self-guided tour brochures, some postcards that I think you can get if you sign up for their mailing list, which would be great so that you can help them build this collection and continue this work into the 100th anniversary. So I would also like to say that we have some postcards as well from MOHAI. We have a survey, so if you take our little survey, we can give you a postcard not sold in stores. Yeah. And finally, if you would like to join us for the next History Cafe, that's on Wednesday, October 15th, and it'll be on Indian freedom fighters of the Pacific Northwest. So if you've ever heard of the Gadar Party, you may not have, so come check it out. And thank you again, everyone, for coming. Take care.
Thank you. Good job, man.
It worked, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
That was
All
cool.
your help. Your confidence was my confidence.
I have a question.
I have an answer.
Do you recognize the name Steve Kubota?
I recognize the name Steve Kubota.
He'd be about